10 out of 10 vintages, we will make ice wine. 3 to 4 out of vintages, Germany will make ice wine.
Exactly.
So it's that advantage of cold. Ice wine needs to be made naturally until the grapes freeze on the vines, and they must be picked at -8 degrees Celsius or colder. There are stories where the temperature will plunge such that the grapes become marble pellets, and they've been known to break the presses. They're so hard.
Oh my gosh.
You only get like a drip out of each one. They call it extreme winemaking. You don't want those little pellets to thaw either. They've got to stay frozen because it's the concentration of the flavor, the dehydration that has happened naturally. That's where they get all of that luscious elixir. It's a honeyed elixir. It's like peach preserves and apricots. It would be the drink that they would serve you as you're waiting outside the pearly gates to get into heaven. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 180. Why is ice wine considered extreme winemaking? And what are some weird but wonderful food pairings for this elixir? Which Canadian wine regions should you visit next? And what unusual things can you do at Ontario wineries? You'll hear those stories and more in part 2 of our chat with Janina Doyle, host of the Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat podcast. You don't have to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I do hope you'll go back if you missed it after you listen to this one. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing story of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Depression, and Drinking Too Much. One of the biggest things to overcome when you're writing anything, but especially when you're writing memoir, is not to give your critics, sometimes haters, too much power. It's easy to let your monkey mind run off with thoughts like, that's a stupid thing to say, or why would you admit to that? In my memoir, I'm all in on vulnerability. I'm revealing things I would have been embarrassed to say a few years ago. Things like drinking too much, being overly competitive, getting in my own way with perfectionism, which really is procrastination in disguise. Yet it's those admissions of weakness that form the strongest bonds with someone who reads my work. Not the critic or the hater, but the person who says, I've been there too. I get it. I need to make a daily effort to keep focused on the people this memoir is for, those who actually like my style, rather than those who don't. It reminds me of the quote that worrying is like praying for what you don't want. Whether it's writing or working on some other project, you need to have your own back first, to believe in yourself before anyone else will. Have you ever let yourself get in your own way? Let me know. As promised, I'll share a beta reader review with you now. This one is from Sarah Garrett in Reston, Virginia. This is such a great read. Natalie is so relatable. With many memoirs, it feels like the author is glorifying him, herself, which makes it hard to read. I felt like Natalie was telling her story directly to me, more like a conversation. It made me cry with her, laugh with her, and cheer her on while reading. She's in the wine industry, and while there are many perks of the job, there are also many cons. She goes into both in detail, and it was interesting to see how a profession that seems so glamorous can be a struggle as well. Natalie's story will resonate with everyone who reads it in some way, and will leave you feeling like you can win any battle that comes your way. 5 stars. Thank you, Sarah. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Lunch in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/180. This is where I share more behind-the-scenes stories in the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at the manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Okay, on with the show.
The Financial Times of London said Natalie McClean is a new force in the wine writing world, a feisty North American answer to Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson. She can write beautifully about wine. Well, it is true, but she can also speak beautifully about wine. And there is nothing better than getting somebody to talk about a place very close to their heart. And so you should hear and feel the passion today as we talk about wines of Canada, where Natalie is from. The majority of the wine comes out of Ontario. And so there's a big focus on this region alongside ice wine, liquid gold. But we will touch on the other regions, except for BC, British Columbia, as that was the focus on episode 70 with Canadian Master of Wine Siobhan Turner. So do go back to that one to complete your full Canadian wine overview if you haven't heard that one yet. Now, before we go to wine education time, let me take you to my winery of the week. So, of course, we are in Canada, and I've chosen Stratus Vineyards. Now, Stratus Vineyards are in the largest of the 3 subregions in Ontario, the Niagara Peninsula. So within this, there are 2 regional appellations and then 10 sub-appellations. Stratus within the regional appellation Niagara on the Lake. So look for that on bottles. Now, their winery is an LEED facility. So that stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And it was the first winery to get this full certification back in 2005. The winery has this gravity-fed system, and most importantly, it's 100% pump-free. Now, there's not many wineries that can claim this. So they are all about low energy, with a special insulated roof that offers geothermal heating and cooling. And they've even paved their car park with a special stone that reduces light reflected heat. They are all about sustainability and the environment. And of course, that is true of their wines too. So no chemicals used in the vineyards, and they work with native plants and indigenous cover crops to encourage biodiversity. All their grapes are hand-thinned during the year as they practice low-yield viticulture. Then they're hand-harvested and, of course, then hand-sorted before heading into the winery. They are so focused on having the ripest and most mature grapes that they sometimes leave the red grapes on the vine until December. So talking red grapes, I have one of my favorite varieties, the Cabernet Franc. Now, this is the parent of both Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And this is the 2017 vintage. You can get it from Vinum for £28.85 if you're in the UK. So, right, time for me to give this a whirl. Oh, okay, so as expected with Cabernet Franc, it has a beautiful perfume. I get lots of red currants and like this fresh tobacco leaves, and then a little bit of damson and black plum, but it is mainly the red fruits. Now, as with Cabernet Franc, again, it has a kind of slight leafiness and a little bit of smoke. I think they've put a certain amount of time in oak. You can smell that. And there's a real cracked black pepper character. But beautiful, beautiful fruits. Now, all of those notes and aromas, they come through on the palate. That makes my life easy. However, it's very old worldy in style. And when I say that, I mean, it's not too fruity. It's got a good concentration of fruit, but it's quite earthy and it's quite savory. So on the palate, and certainly with this finish, getting lots of graphite, wood spoke, tobacco, cigar box, these kind of notes. But there's also certainly a lot more cassis coming through alongside that red fruit presence. It's a really, really bright wine. The tannins, they're grainy, but they're pretty medium minus. They're quite light. But the acidity is very, very high. Really, I guess I said, a really bright acidity. It's got this Bordeaux edge, but it's not as heavy. But at the same time, it's chunkier than a Loire Valley Cabernet Franc. It kind of really sits in between the two. It's a beautiful, beautiful wine. This would work with roasted red meats, smoked red meats, or you could even pair it with something like a lamb tagine because it has all those kind of herbs and spices and it will really merge well with the aromatics of this wine. So if you haven't already jumped onto the Cabernet Franc train, now is the time to buy your ticket. And whilst you're waiting in the queue to get that ticket, let's have a listen to the chat with Natalie now. Now, you are Canadian. It was obvious that we would need to talk about Canadian wine. You're not allowed to talk about British Columbia because that already got spoken about in episode 20. So that is off the market. But we are going to talk about some of the other regions, and one of the main regions of Canada has not been spoken about. So we are all good. Now, in England specifically, generally, we can only find, I think, wines from Ontario, which is the largest region. But how does that compare to Quebec and Nova Scotia in terms of volumes and, well, everything? I'll hand it over to you now.
All right. So a few quick stats. There are 185 VQA wineries, meaning Vintner Quality Alliance, which is like our DOC or our AOC. It's our appellation of guaranteed. These grapes come from this place and are made according to certain rules. So 185 wineries have that designation, 1,700 acres of vineyards in Ontario. And just to put that in perspective, Ontario, I mean, it depends on if you're talking about vineyard acreage, number of wineries, dollar amount sold, but it accounts for almost 90% of wine produced in Canada. Okay. I'd say BC is like, let's say almost, because my math is not going to add up in a minute, but BC is maybe almost 10%. And then you've got 1 or 2% in Quebec and Nova Scotia. They're much smaller. And I think like England, the major wine regions are in the south of the country. It's where it's warm enough to make wine, whereas Quebec and Nova Scotia are much cooler climates. So they're making mainly from hybrids or German varietals. We've got some wineries in like the prairie provinces and Newfoundland, but they're making wine from fruit that's not grapes.
Okay. A bit like when we spoke about Scotland.
Exactly.
There is definitely a parallel. So what is the climate like in Ontario? Because it's still really, really cold in the winter, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I shiver when you ask. Yeah. Well, we have consistently cold weather here. It's why we're the largest producer of ice wine, which we'll get to in a moment. But we're very much a cool climate. And I mean, we can have wide swings from winter to summer. One of the subregions of Ontario is called Prince Edward County. It's the most northernly. And in the winter, they have to hill the vines before winter comes. So they push the soil up against the vines, because if they don't provide that nice warm or that protective layer of soil, the vines will die from cold during the winter and they won't survive. So Niagara, a little bit more south in the province, is a bit warmer where they don't have to do that hilling. But I mean, we were both on a Celsius metric here. This week or last week, it's gone down to minus 40 degrees Celsius. So it can be bitterly cold, and it's consistently cold, and we're crazy, but we still live here and love it for other reasons.
Well, should we talk about ice wine? Because that is actually Canada's speciality. Now, I know still wine is growing, sparkling we might be able to touch on, but let's do ice wine, because I don't know if this is still accurate, but I've seen statistics over the years that, yes, ice wine, Eiswein, it came originally from Germany, but around 80-90% of the world's ice wine is coming from Canada now. I don't know if that's still true, that statistic.
I would tend to believe it because we're so consistently cold. So let's make it a statistic that's been verified now. Yeah. But a 10 out of 10 vintages, we will make ice wine. 3 to 4 out of vintages, Germany will make ice wine.
Exactly.
So it's that advantage of cold, if you will. And a lot of exports to the UK are ice wine. And just a few stats there, if they're of interest. Ontario exports about 800,000 Canadian dollars worth of exports to the UK. And that represents 80% of what Canada exports wine-wise to the UK. So most of it comes from Ontario.
Yes.
So it's ice wine, it's ice cuvee, meaning a sparkling ice wine, but also in the market, Ontario has Chardonnay, Riesling, Cab Franc, Pinot Noir, and so on. But back to ice wine, it's kind of a magical process to make it, to harvest it, because you can't just put grapes in an ice box. That is fake, and it is now trademarked, just like champagne is. Ice wine needs to be made naturally until the grapes freeze on the vines, and they must be picked at -8 degrees Celsius or colder. So often that is on a December or January at midnight. And there are stories where the temperature will plunge such that the grapes become literally marble pellets, and they've been known to break the presses. They're so hard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And you only get like a drip out of each one.
No, it's funny because I remember a story, and I think it's from Inniskillen, which for anyone who wants to have a legendary producer, everyone in the UK, that's probably the main one, that and Pelly Island. These are the two that you can definitely find in the UK. Just, you're quite rightly said, it has to be -8 or lower, but they made big mistakes, I think, at the beginning stages of learning, which is going back to only the 1980s. We're not going back that far. And they were picking at something like -18. And at that point, it's too cold. And so, as you said, like these marbles going into any kind of machine, things are flinging off and it's really destructive. So their ideal picking temperature is like -10 to -12. But of course, each winery will have difference of opinion, but -18, too cold. So it's got to be really tough to get it right, the right temperature to pick.
They call it extreme winemaking. And because you don't want those little pellets to thaw either, as you pick them back to the winery, they've got to stay frozen to stay concentrated, because it's the concentration of the flavor, the dehydration that has happened naturally because of the hang time all the way to December, January. That's where they get all of that luscious elixir. I like to say that ice wine, it's a honeyed elixir. It's like peach preserves and apricots. It would be the drink that they would serve you as you're waiting outside the pearly gates to get into heaven.
Do you know what? I totally understand. Of course, as well, it's always so golden. Well, mostly gold in the glass, unless, of course, we're talking about Cabernet Franc. Let's stick with the white grape varieties, which are more normal. But yeah, I always get this quite exotic. I don't know. I've always got lots of these really vibrant pineapples as a majority.
Tropical fruit.
Really, it's absolutely stunning.
Wonderful, because people don't realize, because they think of it as a dessert wine, but two things. It can be served at the front of the meal or during the meal. Substitute wherever you might try sauterne.
Exactly.
Like a foie gras. I know that's probably not a exactly politically correct pairing, but wherever you might have sauterne, the sweet wine from Bordeaux, substitute an ice wine. But also, ice wine only has about 10% alcohol. So unlike port and fortified dessert wines that have double, you are not going to be asleep on the sofa at 7 p.m., right? So the big bonus. But there's so many food pairings. I mean, biscotti, fruit flan, fruit cobbler, spicy jalapeno chips.
Foods.
Yes.
Absolutely. Sweet and spicy.
Yes.
So Thai food and Mexican food. And
sweet meets heat.
Indian.
It's a great combo.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you can really play with it. But of course, just to point out to everybody, sweet wines are considered from 50 grams of residual sugar upwards. But typically, I'd say, if I'm right, we're talking like 250 grams of residual sugar per litre or something like that. It's in that vicinity. It's
pretty concentrated because, again, the grapes have been allowed to dehydrate. They've lost a lot of their moisture. So they're just so concentrated. And they've had such a long hang time on the vine, well past the usual harvest for still or dry table wines. So that's where they're getting this deep concentration of flavor, sugar, and just beautiful, glorious, expanding flavors as they hit your palate.
But of course, the sad news is it's typically not very cheap, is it? And I think that's because of the yields, like you've talked about, the fact when they're pressing it, most of it's frozen and they're only getting out the tiniest bit of juice. So that ice doesn't exist. You can't use it anymore. So if it was a normal grape where they could get 100% of the juice out, they're getting what, 10, 15% of the juice out.
It's minuscule. And not only is the yield low, like, what you get from those little rock pellets, but also because the grapes have stayed on the vines, 2-3 months longer than usual, they're really subject to predators like deer, rabbits. Starlings are the number one predator they love their ice wines, or the ice wine grapes, I should say. And there's been lots of creativity in trying to keep the starlings away. Like if you go around in the harvest time, you'll hear the bird boxes, and it's screeching sounds of starlings in distress because they're trying to ward off these murmurations of just big, thick clouds of starlings circling overhead, trying to find a nice feast. And they've got nets all around the vines trying to keep the starlings away. My most favorite technique was I went to a winery, Featherstone, which is actually one of my favorite wineries to visit in Niagara, and I can expand on that. But they had like a cannon that would blast off into the vineyards every so often. But these starlings have become so used to the cannon, they were perched along in a little row on the cannon, and the cannon would blast. They would kind of flutter and come back down. Like they found it a nice warm roosting post. It was like almost like giving an index feather to the winemaker. It's like, thanks, but no thanks.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I know. So I've heard that birds can be a massive problem. But yeah, is netting probably the most normal way that they try to keep the birds away from eating that glorious winter feast?
It is. And they can be quite beautiful at night. I've seen starlight, blue moon starlight, highlighting these white nets, like they're almost like ball gowns draped over these vines. Quite beautiful, but it's quite costly and it's not 100% effective. Interesting side bit, I think. Starlings were never native to North America. Some idiot in the 1800s brought them over because he thought that in Central Park, New York, they should have all the songbirds mentioned in Shakespeare's sonnets. And so he brought the bloody starlings, and now, like most winemakers, consider them rats with wings.
No.
So they're so predatory.
That's so funny. Good story. I like that. That's absolutely brilliant. No, ice wine, I'm pretty sure the majority, like 90%, is now growing in Ontario. But there is a little, I see British Columbia as well, which I'm like, you're not allowed to talk about now. You are. But there's British Columbia probably is second. And then there is a little bit in Quebec and Nova Scotia, right? Although I've heard, do they have a different law? I think in Quebec, because it's just too cold, they can actually cut them in advance and then hang them. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what their practices are because I focused mainly on Ontario and BC. But Quebec is the eastern townships, which again is sort of the most southern part you're going to get in that province to ripen. But Quebec also has some marvelous ciders and cider ice wines based on like 50 varieties of apples that they grow there, which is really lovely. And then Nova Scotia is in the Annapolis Valley. I'm originally from Nova Scotia, so it's just about an hour away from Halifax. You get the moderating influence of the Atlantic Ocean. And then the Annapolis Valley is this warm dip, and it's right next to the Bay of Fundy, which is the world's highest tides. They go up and down. But again, the moderating influence of the water, just as you do in Niagara, you've got Lake Ontario. So you've got these little pockets of viability for wine based on, of course, geography and climate.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see how those two grow, I guess, because as we realize more varieties and what you can do with them, it will grow. But let's come back to Ontario, because, of course, that's where everything is. And anyone around the world, if you're going to get hold of a Canadian wine, you're most likely going to be able to get that from Ontario. So there's like 3 sub-regions within Ontario, isn't there? So what's the layout? And again, what's probably the most popular? Popular? That's not the right comment.
The largest, gotcha.
What's the largest, popular? Whatever, potatoes.
Yep. I mentioned Prince Edward County, where they have to hill the vines because it's so cold. It's beautiful, though. All 3 regions are gorgeous, and they do have wine routes and places to visit in addition to the wineries, because a lot of wineries have restaurants attached to them. And there's ballooning and bike riding and inns and country ways and all the rest of it. So lovely, lovely places to visit in all 3 regions. Prince Edward County is more north versus Niagara, smaller. It's a newer region, and It is the smallest of the three in terms of output.
Closest to Ottawa, isn't it, as well?
It is. Yeah, the capital, the coldest capital on earth, colder on average than
Is it?
Moscow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, and that's where you live now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well.
I don't know. But anyway, it's home now, so, and I have a good coat. But there are some wineries around Ottawa. They are very new, and they do struggle a lot with the cold. And so it's not hugely established, but they're making progress. But so then, as you say, the closest drive time is Prince Edward County. So that's probably 2.5 to maybe 3 hours drive.
Okay.
And then Niagara would take 6 hours drive. It's south of Toronto.
Yeah.
And going south. And then the furthest south is Lake Erie, North Shore, and Paley Island, where you mentioned Paley Island Winery is one of the largest producers in the province. Paley Island and Lake Erie, North Shore, that whole region is the warmest in Canada. But the largest is actually Niagara because it's got that lake effect and it's a superb region. And if you think of those Russian nesting dolls, there are sub-appellations within appellations. So there's like Niagara on the Lake, Niagara Bench, Niagara Escarpment, and then you can go down even further.
There's 12 in total, right? So they've got the two kind of main regions within the Niagara Peninsula, but then within them, there's lots of little
even
ones,
more.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. But which goes to show, though, I always say this, when many people don't know of a region and then they find out there's all these sub-regions, it's like, whoa, I haven't even got my head around the fact that there's even wine growing here. But it goes to show if there's sub-regions that based on closeness to the lake, and then, of course, you've got the Niagara River to the east. So Niagara on the lake is going to be slightly different, isn't it? Because it's closer to that Niagara River. It's going to have more of that influence. Water generally moderates temperatures. If you're near a body of water, that tends to, if that's what you need, is going to help. So, of course, the winters are going to be slightly less cold. They're going to hold on to some of that summer temperatures and they're going to moderate it. But at the same time, when things are quite warm, they're going to cool things down. So, so there you go, everyone. If you want to get really wine geeky, you've got 12 sub-regions in total to pay attention to.
It's like a water bottle effect. I've heard it described. As you say, it's storing up heat during the summer, the lake is. And the breezes are moderating or mitigating the heat of the summer. And it's storing up that heat, the water is. And then it lets it off in the winter, so the winters aren't so cold. So it's got this circular motion of the seasons where it literally is moderating the temperatures in all seasons.
Amazing. I've seen pictures as well in the winter. And of course, anywhere that has the snow on vines is beautiful as well. So, and during the summer with the lakes reflecting the sunshine, I can imagine actually this region in general, any time of the year must be stunning.
It is. I tend to visit more in the summer or fall because those are gorgeous times to visit. But, anytime really. And even Niagara itself, there's even more to do. There's this very quaint, sort of beautiful little old village. There's the Shaw Festival, the Bernard Shaw Festival. So it's great for literary types as well to combine our books and bottles. And then a lot of the producers that you can get in the UK, you can visit here, whether it's Andrew Peller, Cave Spring, Domaine Calis, Henry of Pelham. These are all labels that do make it to the UK, but you can come visit them here while you're here.
Who did you mention, a winery of yours not of yours, that you had a wonderful experience on, you wanted to talk about?
Okay, so it's called Featherstone. Okay. And it's owned by a husband and wife, and it's an adorable, tiny winery on the Niagara Escarpment. So they don't like starlings either. And Louise...
Does anyone apparently?
No, they're just like non grata. But Louise, the wife, is a falconer, and she has trained a falconer to chase after the starlings.
Oh, it's brilliant.
So it helps a lot. It's all very natural, but it's also how the falcon eats. Every spring, they bring in all these baby lambs, and the lambs, they're only tall enough to eat the nice grasses, and they'll eat naturally the leaf canopy near the bottom of the vines. But they don't like the grapes because they're not ripe and they're too high up for them. But these baby lambs are so adorable. They call them lamb mowers because they reduce their environmental hoof print. I mean, the puns go on. I went to visit all the lambs at the lamb farm where they get the lambs. And there was a woman there. Her last name was Shepherd. But anyway, there was this
totally destined. to work there.
I know, right? But they had this big male sheep, I guess a ram, and he had his hoofs up tall. He was being very alpha male. And as we passed him, I was asking, what is that sheep? And I forget what she called him, but she said, he's from Alberta. He thinks he's hot stuff, but he was there to mate with all the female sheep. So anyway.
Well, quite clearly he was hot stuff.
He was hot stuff, very literally. And then I asked later when I got back to the winery, it's just so beautiful and the wines are gorgeous. Their Rieslings are just, I think, the best, among the best in Ontario. I said, well, what happens with the lambs at the end of the season? She goes, well, we don't talk about that. But she was just laughing. The reason we don't name the lambs, it's the circle of life. They go to one of the best restaurants in the region and they have a snout to tail kind of food and wine pairing. So the lambs, some of them, not all of them, go to this grand feast in the fall of lamb dinner. Anyway, sheep dinner.
Well, as you said, circle of life.
Circle of life, yes. They were happy in their youth. They were
roaming as lamb mowers. Brilliant.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So people need to come actually to this winery. The best time would be in the spring then, and they can see the little lambs.
Oh yeah, all the lambs and the hawk, all the animals. It's a working farm. I think that's why I loved it so much. It's like people have this thing about wines, it's fancied up farming. It's not even fancied up. It is a farm. These are working farms in most cases, and it's not glamorous, but it's wonderful.
Beautiful. I need to come. So yes. In terms of grape varieties, we've mentioned Riesling. Is Riesling probably the number one white grape variety growing for still wine?
Yes, I'd say Riesling and Chardonnay. Cool climate Chardonnay has made a comeback around the world. We're done with ABC, anything but Chardonnay, the over-oaked fruit bombs. So I would say the two. Riesling probably does lead, but I think the Chardonnays we make here are crisp and steely. Think more Chablis than Chardonnay
heavily
down south.
oaked.
Yeah, exactly. But with our own signature. So yeah, I would point to those two whites being very much the signature of Ontario white wines.
And then red, would it be Cabernet Franc?
Yes, excellent. Yeah. Excellent Cabernet Franc, but also Gamay, the grape of southern Beaujolais, and Pinot Noir, the grape of northern Burgundy, because they're cool climate. They do well here. And so those grapes, if we put them all together, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, maybe occasionally Pinot Meunier, we also make great, great sparkling wines.
Right. And again, Ontario is leading for the sparkling wines.
Yes. Ontario in Canada would lead sparkling wines. Now, all the other regions make them. Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and BC because of the cool climate. But yeah, they're winning awards and just breaking records in terms of how great they are and aging well and, on the lees, all kinds of different styles.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I remember reading in Lake Erie, North Shore, which you mentioned is a little bit warmer. Mm-hmm. There is actually some Merlot and like Cabernet Sauvignon growing there because it is that little bit warmer. So that separates that a little bit from lower down the Niagara. Yeah,
they can produce warmer reds. If we have a warm vintage, it's great. But generally, year in, year out, you'll get warmer reds like Colio Estates down there produces some really great reds. And Paley Island, of course, a big producer.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in terms of the ice wine, just coming back to that, of course, I see Riesling, Vidal, which is the hybrid, which just nobody's doing that as a still wine, are they? Because it just suits.
It suits ice wine. There are a few who do it still, but it's a small percentage. Some are making orange wine, like Southbrook Estates makes a marvelous orange wine out of Vidal. Anne Sperling, rock star winemaker. She's just led the charge for biodynamic and organic winemaking in Canada. She also owns a winery in BC, Sperling Vineyards, has consulted with her husband in Nova Scotia, Blomidon Vineyards. So she's really led the way and established the world's first orange wine appellation here in Ontario, VQA. But for Vidal, it tends to be floral, a thin-skinned grape, so it does wonderfully well as an ice wine. My personal preference, though, is Riesling for the basis of ice wine because it has that silver seam of acidity that balances the sweetness and enables ice wine to age longer, too.
Okay. And of course, for anybody, it is a wine that can age with the sugar, with the acidity. It's more about preference, though, with just like still wine, it will get darker in color, it will get more honeyed, it will get a little bit maybe smokier, but it'll just get richer, and the more fresh aromatics will start to change. So if you like it fresh, you can drink it young, but you can lie it down and enjoy it much
Precisely.
later on, right? Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. So it's the ice wine, Riesling, Vidal, and Cabernet Franc are the three that I see.
Yes.
I think Cabernet Sauvignon is being used as well in ice
It
wine,
is,
isn't it?
So we do get those red ice wines, and Gewürztraminer as well is sometimes a basis. And people are, I mean, there's been experiments with Chardonnay as the basis and so on. But yeah, the big ones tend to be Riesling and Vidal, and then to a lesser extent, the red-based grapes.
And in terms of, we mentioned Vidal is a hybrid. So for anyone, it's a crossing of two different Vitis plants. So Vitis vinifera is the plant that we, our Chardonnays and our Cabernet Sauvignon, all the grapes, But in America, Vitis lambrusca, and America and Canada that's been kind of the main Vitis plant. Is that still planted in Canada? Are people making any wine from Vitis lambrusca?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. I tend to focus on all the wineries that are the classic vinifera grapes. One of our big hybrids though is Baco Noir.
Okay. I have no idea what it tastes like and what it is, but I've seen Baco Noir on many different bottles online, not in front of me.
Yeah. Henry of Pelham is the star maker of Baco Noir. There are a number of other producers who do it very well, but they've made a real name out of their Baco Noir, like they really stand for it. And Baco is a full-bodied red. It's smooth. I don't know how to describe it. Like a little bit like a Syrah, a little bit like a Cabernet, but it has these dark, fleshy, ripe fruit, berry flavors. It's great with grilled meat. It's a great wine, especially the way they make it.
And quite clearly, it's a hardy grape variety that can handle frosts and cold. So this is a hybrid. It is. Right.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Baco Noir, everybody. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, I mean, what's the future, in your opinion, for Canadian wines of Ontario? What do you think?
Probably like England, there's so many new wineries springing up every year. Mm-hmm. And when I say bigger, I don't mean bigger companies, but just more diversity, lots of little tiny boutique wineries, more experiences when you go to the winery, like Andrew Peller or Peller Estates. You can go down into the ice wine lounge where it's -8 degrees. They give you a parka and it's all ice and you taste ice wine. And then afterwards you can go up to their splendid restaurant and have a fine dinner. I mean, there's just lots of experiences when you visit these regions that are really fun.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. So lots of tourism I see in the future, more and more great restaurants, more and more boutique wineries experimenting, and just even traditional wineries knowing more and more what works. I mean, we've got a lot of experience now. We're still considered a relatively new region, but I mean, there's just decades and decades of experimenting with soils and climates and grapes that they're really perfecting the wines here that we do well.
Perfect. And if people come, you said obviously most of these wineries are open to visitors and they have their restaurants and have wonderful cellars and experiences. Are there specific wine routes in place? Like if people came, is there the Niagara Peninsula wine route or?
Exactly. And there's an organization called Wine Country Ontario, which is kind of like the Wine Council for Ontario. They produce a really terrific map of all the wineries, and you can get it online as well. I'll send you the link for that, Janina, for your show notes.
Yes.
But they have lots of resources on their website. I have all the wineries on my website as well, so that folks can find out, where to go. And of course, if you're visiting there now or in the summer, you want to plan out your visits because with social distancing, it may ease up completely. The wineries are open for visitors, but sometimes you do need to make an appointment just because of the social distancing aspect.
But they are open and they're waiting for us. Amazing.
And it's a more personal experience. I think in some ways, although, COVID has been very hard on wineries and restaurants, for the wineries, I think there's been some good in that it's a much more personal experience. Often now you make an appointment like you would at a restaurant. You sit down and taste. It's leisurely. You're not fighting at a tasting bar with a throng of people. And sometimes even the winemaker will come over and talk to you, or somebody will guide you through. You might be doing some food pairing. So it's a more personalized experience now.
Beautiful. Okay, you've inspired me to come. Amazing.
Yes, you have to come.
You're so passionate. Like, I think you are my new inspiration,
Oh.
on TV, writing books, and of course your podcast. So you're fantastic. Remind
you.
everybody again where they need to go on your website so they can find out about all your online courses and your books and everything that you're doing. Where do they need to go?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Janina, and for the plugs. So my website is nataliemaclean.com. So it's NATALIEMACLEAN. I also wanted to mention that I am working on my third book. I think I mentioned it briefly. It's a memoir, very different from the first two books, but I am looking for beta readers, or as you might say, beta readers. So, so if any of your listeners or if you yourself, Janina, are interested,
I think I might have to.
I would love input on that. It's more of a serious story about being a woman in the wine industry for the past 20 years, but wine is all through it, is still wine soaked for sure. So if anybody wants to reach me either through my website, nataliemaclean.com, email me, natalie@nataliemaclean.com. And the website is where you'll find my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, the previous two books, my online food and wine pairing courses, and all the stuff, all the things.
Everything. Natalie, thank you ever so much. It's been a pleasure. And quite clearly, we should do this again sometime.
We really should. How's Monday?
Perfect. I'm free anytime.
Janina, I can't wait till you come over here. I'm going to, tell the folks at Wine Country Ontario they need to encourage you strongly to get over here.
I think that sounds like a plan. Thank you. Have a beautiful day. And we'll speak on Monday and then on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
Take care.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye. Do let me know where you are in the world and if you can get hold of Canadian wine. Now, after listening to that chat, I really hope there is some available to you. Now, I'm often quoting authors and writers, so why not quote Natalie MacLean herself to finish off this episode, as she too has a few quotes to be found on the internet. One that she so eloquently said was, "While wine may be only a drink, it is also one of the most complex sensory pleasures we enjoy. It is as cerebral as it is sensual, and it requires a lifetime to appreciate it."
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Janina. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Janina, links to her podcast and website, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/180. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or want to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Lori Budd, who graduated from the prestigious UC Davis Enology program. She and her husband own Dracaena Wines in Paso Robles, California. She's also the host of the podcast called Exploring the Glass. In the meantime, if you missed episode 21, go back and take a listen. I chat with author John Mahoney on whether wine is the source of civilization. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Who was the first person that made wine? I was taught that civilization had established itself from, say, Babylon or Egypt. We go back to the time of Christ, that's 2,000 years, everything else is BC. And everybody thought that wine was 3,000. Then they said, well, no, it's probably 4, even 5,000 years old. But two places established that was incorrect, the University of Toronto and the University of Pennsylvania. Both of them did research and found out that it's well over 3, 4, 5,000 years old. They've proven and actually have done scientific testing to prove that wine production is probably 7,500 to 8,000 years old.
Wow.
My research took it further, and I'm saying that we started with wine right after the last ice age.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines and stories we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps an Ontario sparkling wine. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.